Welcome to Innovation Guelph Presents Toolkit Tuesday. I am Mickey Campo and a program manager here at Innovation Guelph. And I'm really happy that you can join us here today over the lunch hour. I would first like to welcome our two friendly American Sign Language interpreters, whose time today is graciously provided in kind by Sign Language Interpreting Associates of Ottawa. Samantha and Krista, thank you for both joining us today, and also thank you to Sliao. While I'm at it, a big thank you out to our corporate sponsors, Ernst & Young, Reese Informatica, Invest in Guelph, BDO, and Bonsai Growth, and we're very grateful for their support. So, before beginning today's session, I would like to give recognition to the land that Guelph is on, and we recognize that many others here today may be on different territories. So we invite and encourage each of you to give some recognition to the land that you occupy today and every day. As we gather for today's event, we are reminded that the city of Guelph is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. So we have a responsibility to the stewardship of this land that we live and work on here. And today we acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Anishinaabe peoples, on whose traditional territory we are meeting. Today's webinar is called Talent, the Lifeblood of Success. And we have Justin Litchfield, CEO of JobJunxion, and Sarah Gray, the head of recruiting at JobJunxion, joining us today. Just real quickly before we hand things over, I wanted to let you know a little bit about Innovation Guelph, just in case you haven't heard of us before or know too much about us. We are one of 17 regional innovation centers in Ontario, and while we're located here in Guelph, we have programming for entrepreneurs and companies of all sizes throughout Canada. We work with our clients, supporting them through multiple stages of business growth, from startup to scale up, with lots of program, workshops, networking, mentorship, opportunities. We have an upcoming event called Lessons from Leaders happening soon on October 28th. It is kind of a comeback for us. Lessons from Leaders is a wonderful panel series that we used to run pre-COVID, and we're bringing it back on October 28th, so you're all welcome to come to that. We'll put a link in the chat box for you later if you'd like to sign up to come to that. It is a breakfast program and a really great session. So we also do a great big trade show. We did the Ontario Innovation Expo last week, which was a great success and a whole lot of fun for us. But I don't want to keep talking about us. We're here to talk to Justin and Sarah. So I will just do a quick little intro of both of them and then hand things over officially. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Justin and Sarah. Justin and Sarah come to us from JobJunxion, and JobJunxion was founded in 2017 with the vision of creating a company to build great companies. Whether it's sourcing, screening, selecting skilled talent, or tailored consultation on growth strategy, JobJunxion believes that great talent is the lifeblood of success. That's the title of today's session. Justin was born and raised in Guelph, and he started his first company at 18. A serial entrepreneurship has kind of always been in his blood. And Justin sees the power of people and is willing to do what it takes through leadership and innovation to overcome any challenges. And Sarah started her career in nursing. Helping others will always be a true passion of hers. She transitioned into business to be a part of creating solutions to bigger world problems that felt out of reach as a direct caregiver. So she loves having the flexibility to be creative in how we work to solve the issues. And whether it's work or hobbies, pushing to the limit comes quite naturally for Sarah. I know when talking in advance of this session, Justin and Sarah seem to work really well together and have some great clients and have been doing some really wonderful things for them. So I'm hoping that this education session is valuable for all of you here on the call today. I will hand things over to you and let today's session begin. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mickey, and what a lovely introduction that was. My goodness. And thanks again for the events last week. That Innovation Expo was so much fun. We were so happy to to walk the floor and see some of the lovely folks in the community here. Just looking at the screen here, are we okay to get the slides going, Sarah?
Yeah, let's see.
Well, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I noticed we have a chat function going, which is pretty neat. If anybody would like, I'd love to hear where folks are from today. Guelph, of course, the lovely city of Guelph. But if there's anybody outside of the area or kind of more GTA or KW, feel free to let us know in the chat.
You guys see the presentation okay?
Looks good.
Okay, awesome.
Okay. So to begin things here, let's go through our agenda briefly. So today there's 3 main topics we'd like to touch upon. As you can see here, strategic growth, hiring best practices, and planning for the future. Now I know those might sound like they do have some overlap and some similarities, and it's absolutely true, they do. And in fact, that's one of the things we notice can cause issues or challenges in the growth cycles of companies. Properly defining the difference between these 3 things and some of the nuances that each one of them carry can be a determining factor for getting a really good grip on what the next goals for your company might be and how to achieve them. So jumping in here, if you have any questions about the right time to hire, how can you find the right candidates, how long will the search take? There's a multiple step process we'll talk about a little bit farther down the road, but searching, screening, and selecting the right member for your growing team is really one of the core concepts we want to touch upon today. And as we go, we'll share a little bit about who we are and how we like to help businesses grow. So let's jump in. Okay, so we're going to spend lots of time today talking about how to find the right hire, and I'm gonna kind of jump to the end for a moment here and let you know there's no silver bullet, or if there is, we're not wise enough to have found it yet. So it is a process. There are a number of things that go into it, and so please bear with us as we go through that and what we've learned along the way and what works for us to help us grow the amazing clients we're fortunate to work with. But let's talk about the wrong hire. So why is this important, right? Ultimately, you know, finding the right hire sounds great, but I thought it would be nice to start things off and go through some of the challenges or the issues that come up when the wrong hire is onboarded. So if you were to jump on Google right now and say, Google, how much does it cost me to hire the wrong person at my company? And word for word, what you see on the screen here will pop up, and Google will tell you the estimated cost is somewhere between 1.5 to 3.5 times their annual salary. Now, when I read that stat for the first time, 2 things came to mind for me. The first one was, wow, that's a big number when we start to consider about annual comp packages. And 2 was, why is there such a large range? 1.5 to 3.5 times, multiple hundreds of % difference. We're going to go through some of the factors that help educate why that range is so large. So let's jump into a few. First of all, you've got the type of role. Now, we all know there's many different roles at many different organizations, but the key factor here is how many folks typically would report to the individual in that role. What we find is in typical org structures, having a really well-grounded leader, whether it's in a middle management position, whether you're managing entry-level folks, or you're more at the V-suite level and you're a VP of sales, and you've got multiple people that recruit and work for you, or even at the highest level. Typically, the higher level the role is, the more people report to them, and the bigger detriment you can see from the wrong hire. The second component is time spent in the role, of course, right? If we've got somebody in that position for 6 months versus 1 month, and you realize pretty quick, you know, wow, this person really had what it looked like we needed on paper. The hard skills were there. They really jumped at the bit. They performed very well in our interview process, let's say, but now it's been 30 to 60 days and the culture fit just wasn't there. And we're seeing friction where we weren't seeing friction before. And some of our key performers are now performing inadequately compared to before we hired them, before they had a leadership role in place that should allow them to really achieve their potential to a greater capacity. So time and role is quite frankly critical. There's a few factors there that can help protect yourselves and your organizations. One of the biggest ones we see, Sarah and I experience this all the time, is having a probation period included in your contract with whoever you might be bringing on, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit more down the road. And the last one, of course, is your candidate compensation. So whether it's a full-time package, including mostly a base comp, let's say, or you've got performance incentives and a few ways to ease the burden a little bit and allow this individual to really achieve, let's say, optimal success or hoped for success as you make the hire. We'll talk about a few tips and tricks to make sure that we keep that range as low as possible if and when the wrong hire does happen. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we won't spend too much time here, but just briefly, you guys can see the screen here. We've bolded a couple of points. I don't think these would be a big shock to many folks. Time and expenses associated with onboarding and training, you know, that really ranges company to company. Of course, if you're a larger company, you've got multiple individuals typically involved in your interview process, your screening process, even your sourcing process. Hours spent reviewing resumes and interviewing candidates. I think we can all see why you can get a little carried away there, especially when using some of the more traditional online tools that really specialize in just getting as many resumes onto your desk as possible, as opposed to vetted ones that are really going to be worth your time if you're in that position of screening and selecting for you or your business. Time and energy managing poor performance. Yeah, this one hits close to home for us. You know, over the years, some of the folks we've brought on our team, mostly in a sales capacity, I would say for us, it's taken a while for them to get their feet under them, right? And I think knowing when to really identify that the performance isn't there and this might not be the right fit, it's really tough. It's really challenging as a leader. I think it's one of those key factors that ultimately, thinking back to the last slide and how big that range was, that's a big factor to keeping that on the smaller side. Is being able to identify that as quick as possible. Next on the list, we've got a drain of productivity. Of course, implementing the wrong fit, whether it's a culture lapse or it's just not working well in the org structure. Productivity takes a hit not only from the individual who's not properly placed, but oftentimes the surrounding team or even the surrounding teams of those teams, again, depending on how critical that role was. We've got impact on team morale and stress. Of course, we've all been there. Risk of diminished customer service. Yeah, so I think if we look at those 2 points side by side, the difference we're really trying to get at there is you'll see the pain and the problems on an internal scale, right, between your own team members, typically seen as morale or stress, not working cohesively like we would have liked, right? But secondly, depending on whether that candidate's more external facing, we can also see diminished customer success and the eyes of the business start to take a hit as well, whether that's your reputation that you've worked really hard to build with you and your business over the years, or it's potentially new clients or new connections that you were really excited to meet. Having the wrong person be that first hand to shake, so to speak, can quite frankly have drastic long-term effects, of course. And then last but not least, this one usually gets overlooked, is the legal fees. You're obviously opening yourself up to risk and challenges there from a legal standpoint, as a termination does raise some questions and some eyebrows typically. If you and that candidate didn't see eye to eye over a couple-month period, especially without a probation period clause put into an employment contract, we do see this happen fairly regularly. Sarah and I work really hard to make sure that this happens as little as possible, and that communication has really been focused on throughout the entire process. We don't care if that individual is there for 30 days or 300 days. Making sure there's communication between the folks that ultimately did the hiring and that candidate is critical from day one. I'm sure that's not a big surprise to many folks. Let's jump to the next slide here.
Yeah. I just want to add to the impact on team morale and stress. And as Justin mentioned earlier, the higher up you get, the more people who are reporting to that person, the more impact it has on the team and the morale. One of the most common reasons for changing employment is that they aren't satisfied with their manager or the person that they're reporting to. So it can have a very costly effect in a huge turnover of your company, which, maybe now you're not just replacing one person's salary, you're replacing multiple, and that will have a whole effect on your productivity and your community that you've worked hard to build.
Great point, Sarah. Oh, I see we've got a few people chiming in the chat. We've got some from Toronto, Ottawa. Wow, I think that might be the farthest. Aberfoyle, so Guelph, yeah, fair enough. Snowball throw down the road. Okay, so what do we have here? Career Builder put this study out not long ago. It's just a quick stat for you guys. I thought it was quite interesting. For small businesses all the way up to large corporations, we see about 3 out of 4 companies admit to hiring the wrong candidate for critical roles. Now that's really important there, that last piece. That's typically where you'll start to see the larger end of that range in lost earnings, revenue, or profits with making the wrong hire. And this is our point at the bottom. This is widely considered one of the most expensive and common mistakes. Now, I find that to be fascinating personally. Sarah and I talk about this a lot. When in the business world, what we've found is when you find an example like this, where you have something that's not only one of the most common things to happen, but also one of the most expensive, that's where our alarm bells start going off, right? Like that's something we really, really want to push hard to make sure we're reducing or eliminating entirely as much as we possibly can. It just has such a large effect on the success chance ultimately for these businesses, especially at the smaller level, or the success metrics for the larger businesses making many, many hires every month, every quarter. No matter where they're at in that spectrum and in that range of a growth cycle, very important consideration. Did you have anything to add, Sarah?
No, it's definitely clearly a common problem, and we hope to be able to shed some light on some good solutions for some efficient and good hires.
Yeah. All right. So next slide here. I'm looking to hire. Now what? Well, when we started off about 5 years ago now, the first thing we would ask for anybody looking to grow their team and grow their business was a job description. Saying, okay, great, you're ready to grow, you want to hire somebody? What do you have on paper? What have you talked about as a company to say, this is what we need right now, can you please help us find that? After about a year or so, Sarah and I found that there's actually a few steps that happen before the job description, just naturally. And today we wanted to share a few of those with you. One of the first ones we've really built a lot of our internal business culture and our mission statement around over the years, and that's this first point here. Write down the problem your business is facing. Step away from the hiring scene, step away from thinking up the perfect candidate that's really going to drive the business to the next level of success, and really look intrinsically and say, what are the pain points here? Sometimes that's easy, and sometimes it's actually quite challenging, right? And I find Sarah and I have done a lot more consulting over the years, and we find that the problem a business is facing and the pain points are not always the same. And I think there's a certain level of thinking there where the problem can be defined by the leadership team from looking at the papers, looking at their books, let's say, and identifying an issue that they'd like to solve, a barrier they'd like to break. But thinking one more level, I don't know, it wouldn't be deeper, it'd be a little more shallow and say, what's actually hurting you? What's hurting your business partner? What's hurting your team? What's hurting your managers? What's hurting your boots on the ground, the folks getting out there, meeting your client, offering that product or service that you do, and building up from there. So let's go down to number 2 here and consider the types and the quality and the quantity of the roles needed to maintain the desired solution. Now, oftentimes when the problem's properly defined, we realize quickly that it's not one role, it's typically multiple that would help achieve the desired result. Step 3 would be your market research, hard skills, soft skills, work-life balance, and compensation. Sarah's going to talk about this a little more down the road. all key factors to help determine what that job description is going to look like, and ultimately who the type of person that might be a great fit is going to look like. Step 4, can you find job descriptions similar to what you're planning to hire for? Now, step 3 is pretty fun, and step 2 is pretty fun. When you get to 4 and you've got this inklings of a job description, and you're looking around on the market, or you're talking to your friends, or the circles of hire, you're looking for a word of mouth hire, which is pretty common, especially in for the smaller companies. And you start to realize, what we just dreamed up and what we think will be the perfect fit, we've never heard of anybody like that. And we've never seen a job description that also matches what we thought of. Don't worry, that happens a lot. It's okay. That is an inkling that it might be a good idea to go back to the drawing board a little bit before you get to step 5 and really start to push that description. We like to stay as rooted in reality as we can here. But last but not least, step 5, create job descriptions built to educate and engage your target audience. I'm going to say that again, educate and engage your target audience. Anything to add for that one, Sarah?
Yeah, definitely. So similar to the wide range of resumes that we see a lot of different structures to job descriptions. So it's important to be thoughtful when putting together your job description. You want to give enough details to give them a full picture and give them an idea of what the company is working on. Like, what is it that this role is built around to achieve for the company? Oftentimes I just see like a quick blurb about the company, like what they do, and then a little bit about the hard skills. Like, we're looking for this education, this amount of experience with these skills, apply here. And they're kind of missing like the purpose, like what would my role with that team be? So definitely give them a nice picture of what they'd be contributing to. And it's really important to share the company's values. And I'll get into that a little bit further. And so I'll just put a bookmark in that, because I do want to spend some time talking about building out your company values. It's really important to align that with your hires. So once you have a job description, what's the process? So I wanted to just spend a little bit of time giving you a bit of an overview. As Justin's mentioned, we worked with lots of different companies over the past couple of years, both smaller structured companies all the way up to enterprise. And we've picked up on some really good trends, what works, what doesn't work. So definitely want to take some time today to give you some insights on what we've seen. So you've got your recruitment process. So once you build out your job description, you're feeling really good about it, you're going to start your active search of sourcing great talent. And then you're obviously going to have to put them through some sort of interview. So this is just kind of an overview. We'll go into more in depth in a minute here, and then all the way to an offer letter. So what kind of pipelines you want to look for? So once you have your job description ready to go, there's a few different ways you can go about posting it. There's, the traditional company website post, your social media. Going through those avenues are really only helpful if you have a big following or you have a lot of organic traffic already going to those sites. And what's really important in a job posting versus like hands-on sourcing, like doing a lot of the reach out to this talent yourself, is you want to make sure that you're getting the right target audience with that job posting. I don't know how many times I've seen people, put it up on their website or put it up on Bamboo, and it's a senior software engineer role, and they're getting like hairdressers and things like that, like people who are just not qualified at all. So they're spending all of this time looking through these resumes that are completely unqualified. And that's just more time on the person who's in charge of hiring, unfortunately. So the more targeted you can be, the more efficient your time is spent. So there's some different tools out there like Indeed and LinkedIn where you can do some more targeted searches. And I think it's important to look at who's going to be responsible for the hiring. So a lot of people who have, so just for example, we work with some smaller sized companies where it's the CEO that's doing the hiring. And then, you know, as you start to scale, some of your first hires may be someone in HR who can take over that. The time spent, this is back to that cost analysis we did at the beginning. You have to consider, you know, that your productivity in your role that you've been assigned to, you are now replacing with hiring duties. So even though it's super important to be hiring, it's really important to be thoughtful and efficient in how you execute that process so that you're not reducing, you know, your specialization in whatever skill you're, you know, executing on to hire. So there's some benefits to going with an external agency that we've definitely seen from our clients that we work with. As I mentioned, with some of those like more passive routes of pipelines, so that's the job posting and having people apply versus going out and actually doing targeted searches for certain talent. So having that, someone to actually go through a lot of the candidates and do a lot of the sourcing and screening. So we do like a pre-screening or a pre-qualifying before we even put talent in front of the person in charge of hiring. So it just reduces that extra layer of time required to go through all of those. Anything else you want to add just to the different pipelines?
I think we're good for now. Let's forge forward here, and some of this stuff might come back as we look at some of our new content here, but let's go to the next slide.
Sure, sounds good. So once you have a good pipeline, once you're seeing some good quality candidates coming through, whether that's, you know, using some of your LinkedIn and Indeed, directly through a website or something, you want to be able to swiftly move them through the process. So one of the things that we hear from the candidates, so just as much as you are looking at every move that the candidate makes to feel out whether or not there's somebody that would be a good quality candidate for you, candidates are doing the exact same thing to the company. So what is their process like? Is it efficient? Is it thoughtful? You have to really consider the candidate experience through that. So communicating effectively with the candidates and moving them quickly through the process and having a thoughtful interview process. So, you know, some of the bigger companies that we work with, they have 2 rounds. One of the interview rounds is 4 hours. And we see a huge decline, a huge drop off of interested candidates for that interview round. And of course, you know, for some companies it's necessary, but definitely for smaller sized companies who are just trying to get a couple of really good hires, it's definitely not necessary to run them through a full 4-hour interview process. So there's a few different ways that we see people do it. Typically 2 to 3 interview rounds. We see a phone screen that only takes maybe 15 minutes, keeping it really organic. And it's a bit more of a screen. So we call that like the phone screen round. So the ones that you can tell are well qualified from their resume are worth the 15-minute call. We don't want to sink any more time into it in case there's a couple of little red flags that pop up. Maybe it's an in-office role and they happen to be in a different city and they're not willing to relocate, or you know, maybe they're just finishing up a master's and they won't be available for the start timeline that you have. So you don't want to, you know, be finding that out 2 hours into your interview round with them. So sometimes it helps to just have a couple of thoughtful qualifying questions to ask them. And then usually part of that 15 minutes is getting them to talk about themselves, giving some project examples, giving context to how they've used those hard skills that are required for the job. And then really looking at, like, before you're even developing your interview process, you want to understand how you want to test the hard skills and the soft skills. So being thoughtful in the types of questions that you're asking through that interview process. So the phone screen is more them talking to you, hearing them out, making sure that there's no red flags. So things to think about in that interview round would be, is this an in-office role? Is this a hybrid role? Does location matter? So do you need to be feeling out where these people are located and their willingness to come into office? Definitely, as I mentioned, like a start date timeline. If that doesn't line up with a program that they have going on or a contract that they're doing, then that's something that you want to find out sooner than later. Sometimes salary expectations can be something that's talked about. More and more commonly, we're seeing a push for employers to share their salary up front. It was kind of a bit of a gray zone before, but we're seeing a little bit more push from our candidates to have that disclosed to them right off the bat. Sometimes what I'll say to candidates, if we're going in not knowing each other's expectations, and I have a good range, I'll say, what I need to come in at to be competitive with your current salary. And that's a polite way of getting a little bit of a feel for it without being like, what are your expectations? So that's another important thing, making sure that there's a good, that matches with what you're offering for the role. And then
one thing to add, Sarah, too, we've really noticed that in the last year or so, there's been quite a push for a little bit more transparency there on the job posting front. I'm not sure if anyone else has noticed, but even on LinkedIn, I see these polls going around every once in a while, and it's, like if you want to be able to see the job description with the salaries, and they don't like or do a heart or some other emoji if you'd rather it was hidden and you get through the process first. I'm not sure if anyone else has seen that, but it seems like it's really taken off. And sure enough, we see from what our clients say and from what those silly polls say, it's about 90% plus of folks would like a little bit more transparency in the space there. And I think moving to more online work and not quite as much in office has helped kind of promote that push a little bit. So please, if you're someone looking to hire shortly here, don't feel pressured into it, I would say, but maybe do your research on it first. And like we talked about in some of those slides a little while back, see if you can find other job descriptions and other postings that relate to what you want to do. And sure enough, they'll say it there publicly and in a lot of those situations. So something to keep in mind for sure.
I also wouldn't be afraid to give a wide range. So you don't have to give just like a one number salary. You can give a range. So picture what you'd be willing to spend for kind of the least amount of experience, the most training required in onboarding, to like someone who could just step right into the role, instant billable hours, like that guy is ready to earn that top dollar. Because then you're going to get a little bit of everything, and then the control, like, give them a bit of a range of what you're willing to, what your budget is. And then that might help you get some more talent in, a little more negotiating power there on both sides. And we'll get down to compensation too at the end. That's definitely something that's important that we see smaller companies struggle with, especially in today's market. And again, with the remote roles, how that's really changed that employment market. So yeah, I think we've kind of gone over the interview process. I don't know if we have any questions on that, if we want to take a second just to see if anybody has any direct questions about like job descriptions, interview processes. I think that kind of that phone screen, technical, and the technical round doesn't need to just be like like a software engineering role. Those are like a technical round for software engineering is great. Having like a systems question and a programming question are great to get a feel for the efficiency of that person's code and their knowledge. But then even for other professions like marketing, sales, those kinds of things, scenario-based questions are great. Getting a feel for kind of their core competencies, like their critical thinking skills, their communication, their collaboration. There's some great questions out there. There's some good websites too that will help you build out some good questions. But what I like best when I'm building out an interview process is like, what are some things that they would face in real life working at this company for this role? And then building some scenario questions based on things that like you've seen people face in that role, or that you've maybe personally faced, to get a good idea for how they would handle that situation. All right. And yes, of course, important to consider yourself, your time investment into the interview process. You want to be as efficient with that time as possible. This is like kind of the make or break when it comes to having the right hire. So being able to feel out those core competencies and their professional values in this process is important for getting that right hire. And I see we just had a question come in.
Thanks, Sarah. Can you see that question in the chat there?
Yeah, I can. So the question was, how does one identify talent from a CV? So that's great. So for me, when I'm looking at people's resumes, it's a lot, it's basically a checklist of hard skills. So it's hard to see some of the core competencies, like more of those soft skill based things in a resume. For roles that are more soft skill based, like sales, marketing, where it really is a lot more of that personal connection piece. There are some identifying factors. It is a bit of a skill to develop yourself as the person looking for that. So you can start to pick it up in how people write about themselves. I find people who can talk about, who can give examples in their resume of their value add, what was their impact in the company. So you can start to pick up on those pieces just by reading how they talk about their experience. I mean, it's hard to disqualify somebody based off their resume too. This is another thing that we've seen time and time again in our role, is you've got a really, really good candidate who has a terrible resume. As I mentioned with job descriptions, we see a wide range of resumes. So resumes should represent your value add. It's that value exchange. You work for them with your talent for exchange for money to be paid. And so it can be hard to feel that out in their resume. But at the bare minimum, for like the more technical based roles, you should be able to see some evidence through some of their professional experience. Whether or not they, for example, like a software role, they have Python, they have AWS, they've got kind of the basic criteria for the role. The rest of the qualifying does come from more of that conversation base, which is why I say that 15 minutes is really your screening for them. You can usually get a pretty good idea of their competency based on how they talk about their skills. So give me a project example. What was your role? What did you, what was your direct impact on that project? And if they can talk about that with confidence and be very clear at, the tools that they used and how they implemented them, then I feel pretty comfortable moving that person to the next phase. So usually that in-person conversation is a lot better to gauge than just a glance at the resume. I've definitely seen resumes that were vague and didn't give me a good picture of what that person actually achieved, but then had an awesome conversation with them and all of that confidence came through. But then I've also seen the other way around too. So I definitely rely a lot more heavily on the phone screen round to feel that out than I do their actual resume. Salary transparency. Oh, do you want to address this question, Joss?
Yeah, I thought, do we go through more talk into salaries and comp at a later slide, or would now be a good time to do a follow-up question here?
Okay, yeah, we do touch on it. I think it might be one of our last slides.
Okay.
So maybe we'll just loop back to that question
Sounds
when
good.
we get there. Okay.
Sounds good.
Sorry, hold on. Okay. Oh, actually, we're there. So offer letter and negotiations. So staying competitive with compensations can be tough as a small company, especially in those early hires, even like pre-revenue hires, things like that we see, especially with today's market. COVID really changed the face of hiring. It made it a lot more challenging for smaller companies to find great talent because of remote work. Big companies in the States are able to easily hire from Canada, and they come in like with massive compensation offerings that are hard to beat for junior level talent as well. So being able to stay competitive takes some creativity, and there's a lot of important things that people look for. Compensation is definitely one of the top ones, and we'll look at that in a second. How to build your compensation around not only just finances but also lifestyle as well. That's another big key component to what people look for. So yeah, definitely, if you want to address this one, Jess, and then I can touch on this.
Sorry, the question or more of the slide?
Sorry, the question.
Oh, okay. Sure. So Mickey had a great question here. Salary transparency. So what are some of the feedback that we hear from current employees and roles when a new role is posted and the salary is listed, let's say as an example, and you're a growing business and you've got other individuals who are already in that role or a similar role and you're looking to scale out your team? Over time, salaries typically increase, right, due to inflation, due to folks spending a certain amount of time in the role, right? Everyone's trying to continually move up in their career and their pathway there. So if you were to issue a new role and a new posting and the salary is different than what some of your current folks are making, there could be some tension there. Mickey, is that kind of what you were referring to as part of it? Yeah, no, for sure. So we've seen that a number of times, and it's kind of unfortunate, right? No one wants to bring that kind of negative energy or tension into a workspace. I think, though, to be honest, we need to look at the alternatives, right? So let's say some fresh blood comes in and they're an addition to a team and their base salary was a little bit higher, right? If you did list that salary and that comp package in a transparent manner through the postings you have, I would expect as the leader of that business or who's head of HR, someone in a position where individuals who want to talk about their comp, whether it be current or future, might come to you. I would prepare yourself for those conversations. Having those conversations isn't a bad thing, right? And in fact, being able to describe why that role is worth what it is or why there's a price point associated with that talent can be really helpful in the long run to a culture, right? I know it might sound like BS. I'm not kidding though, right? Having a true foundational baseline for where the earnings are and why, and letting your team understand that on a one-to-one level. Again, it can be behind closed doors, it can be a private meeting, right? Of course, it doesn't need to be talked about with everybody at once, but opening up that communication pathway to say, we've got a 10% increase, a 5% increase here versus here. I feel left out. I'm not making as much. I was here for 2 years and you just hired Rachel and Johnny and they're kicking my butt with their comp package. Like, what's going on, right? Have those conversations, right? Be able to tie it back to performance. Tie it back to real grounding factors that determine why that point is where it is. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, I think there might have been part 2 of the question. Did you have anything to add to that though, briefly, Sarah? Because conflict.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds really good.
Okay.
Definitely it can be challenging. I think it's important for people to be looped in on the why for the new hire too. That's kind of the change management that needs to happen when it comes to bringing on somebody new. Even one new hire can kind of change the dynamics of the company, especially when you're a small group. So it's important for them to understand and feel a sense of ownership in the organization. And I feel like if everybody's working towards the success of the company, that they'll be a little more flexible because they feel like they're a part of that. Like, yes, we need this new hire, and this is the market rate right now, and this is what we need to come in at to be competitive. Let's get that person in so that we can all be successful. So it is a bit of a morale piece, and the duty of, you know, whoever's kind of running that side of things with the company to keep everybody on the same page and excited for the growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think keeping the conversation around the word investment too. Growing your team it's an investment, right? It's an investment in the business, but it's an investment in your current team as well, right? Anytime that new role goes up, that new individual walks through the door for an interview, it's exciting, right? It's that company putting more time and more resources into further growing that company. And especially when you're a small team and everyone really has a really hands-on approach and really feel like a part of that core team that drives the success, that drives the motion of that entity, that's great. That's something to celebrate, right? So I think that was a great point, Sarah. And bringing it back to the why we're doing the hire, you know, why we're choosing to invest in this individual, let's say, or in this new position, being able to explain why that's the right step for the business and how you're going to grow it can be really nice. It's just an option. It's obviously up to the leaders to determine how much you want to share with your team. But our style has always been a little bit more open when it comes to that sort of stuff. And we love when the team asks questions and really feel like part of that driving leadership force. Even if they're not in a leadership role, that can feel really good for those employees to have a little bit of know-how and a little bit more skin in the game, so to speak. Now, there was a second portion of the question here. Sarah, you might have a good answer for this. So where can you find the best information on what a role is worth?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And if we have time at the end, we can show you a really cool tool that we use. One thing you can do, there are different websites out there. If you Google kind of what is a typical salary, there are some like government-based like .gov websites that offer some statistics around that. Mind you, with the last couple of years and how COVID has really disrupted the job market, those may not be super accurate anymore. And it may just be better to go on like an Indeed, where there's a lot of other companies who are posting salaries on there, and take a look. LinkedIn job postings do usually have a spot for putting up salaries. We actually have access to a really cool tool that pulls a lot of data from LinkedIn. It's called a talent insights. So you can do a talent report. So you put in all of the requirements that you're looking for, the hard skills, the job title, the location, and it collects all of the data available from all the users on LinkedIn and gives you a bit of a breakdown, an overview of how available that talent is, what the typical salary range is for that role, all the way down to the gender variation in as a professional in that for that job title. So those are really interesting things to see, and gives you a bit of an idea of how quickly you may be able to fill that role. Obviously, the higher demand and the higher the salary, all of those kinds of things may change your timelines for hire. But a tool like that is great for educating you around, what you may need to give and take. So one of the first things that I do with an employer that has a job description ready to go, I go through and I say, what are the must-haves and what are the nice-to-haves? Because I find job descriptions tend to just be a big old wish list.
Yeah.
So they just put everything, and I'm like, what? Okay, if these are the most important pieces to you, there may be some other things that you need to flex on in order for us to get that. So we usually go through and we do yes, this is a must, and then these are maybe things that we could flex on. And that really helps us shape our talent report to figure out exactly how to target that audience.
Yeah, and just briefly, we've found even once or twice we've seen it go the other way. This is rare, mind you, but sometimes we have candidates come through and apply for a position that our client pieced together. And sure enough, they not only are capable of each one of the components in the job description, that wish list, as Sarah said, but sometimes they're above and beyond. Now, typically that comes with a higher comp package, and Sarah and the team will use their discretion to see, all right, who are we going to put through to the shortlist for our clients to review? But we've had a few scenarios where there's a few things that they didn't think of. And when they talk to the talent and they talk to those candidates, they realize, oh my goodness, having that extra set of qualifications or skill sets, that's excellent. That's going to help them better integrate with the team and maybe even prevent them from making another hire back to back, which is great, right? So it's kind of neat. I think that the overall advice we'd give on that side of things is to keep an open mind, right? To have a clear idea of the problems you want to solve, the needs versus the wants, like Sarah said. But then when it's time to sit down and interview the folks that are out there, keep an open mind and see what they're capable of. And every once in a while, you might get pleasantly surprised, let's say.
And then back to offer letter and negotiation. So from our experience working with some of these smaller companies that don't have the budget, especially for those first couple of hires, to come in really heavy hitting with that, there's some different things that you can offer. So the one that I see the most common is like a bit of a scaling salary. So your sign-on salary, base salary, is maybe a little bit lower, coming in a little bit below the expected salary expectations of the candidate. But with the goal of getting them, like, after their probation period, they get an increase. After the first year, they get an increase. So, hopefully by the time they've given you a year of their employment and their time and their skills, they're up to what their expectations are. And people are usually pretty open to those things, especially if they align with the company values and they really like what the company is doing and getting along really well. Those are things that it's like, as long as I can reach my target, I don't care if it takes me a year to get there. I really want to put in some good work and prove that, I have a lot of value to offer here, and work my way up to that expectation. So definitely play with the probationary period to keep yourself safe. Again, going back to the wrong hire, you really don't know what you're getting until you have them actually come in and do the work.
Yeah.
So give yourself a good runway so that you don't get caught up in some of the legal issues once they finish their probation period. So work very closely with them, get some good feedback from your other staff, anyone who's supervising them or working directly with them. Maybe set up some performance reviews to either gather feedback, share that feedback, to make sure that there's really good communication throughout that time period, and you're utilizing that probationary period to really get a good feel for what they're capable of doing and their professionalism for you. And then education and opportunity, that's super important for candidates too. I've definitely seen candidates take a lower starting salary because the company was willing to help pay for education in some form and give them the time off to get that. So there's lots of different incentives that you can use, sign-on bonuses, annual bonuses, things like that, where it gives you a bit of a runway to get them in and started and adding some value and hopefully seeing some of that return for the company so that you can reach those targets. Anything you wanted to add, Jess?
Sounds great. Got just two more slides here, switching over to candidate perspective.
Yeah, so this is kind of what I mentioned earlier. LinkedIn has a survey that it does. So between 2020 and 2021, the top 5, I just took top 5, there's a whole list. But these are the most important things as stated by candidates who are in the job market for things that they look for in employment. Good work-life balance came in as number 1. And we do see that a lot. They are willing to put in a ton of work for you, a lot of good quality work, but when they need the time off or when they need some flexibility, that the company honors that. So we're actually seeing some new styles of paid time off. So some of our more like corporate enterprise clients are starting to move to this unlimited paid time off. So basically, like, if the work is getting done and everything is finished on time, then your time is flexible. So that's maybe not something you want to start with right away, but definitely keeping that in mind when you're building out vacation days and some of your, time off for people. They're looking for some company values around, that employee-centered care and well-being. Obviously, compensation and benefits do seem to come up a lot for people, especially with the cost of living being so high right now too. And we do see, that cost of living kind of differentiate between different, places. So we've got kind of Toronto, which is your big tech hub. You've got a lot of software hires there. You've got a lot of marketing hires there. Compensation might need to be a little bit higher just to keep up with their cost of living in that location. So those are things to be thinking of too when you're building out your job description and your location and your compensations. Benefits are something that usually come into play a little bit later when you're a little bit bigger. But there's some interesting ways to go about that if that seems to be really important and that's a big selling feature for candidates. You're having a hard time, gaining some interest in candidates. And there's some interesting structures. We've heard of people who do they just kind of pool instead of going with a benefit provider like your Manulife, Sun Life. They pool in a little bit of money off of the paycheck each, or they'll match a little bit of that each month, and then that's accessible to their employees if they need, a massage or something like that. So there's some different ways you could get really creative about it just to offer that to your employees. And then flexible work arrangements. So this is kind of that hybrid level work role where there's a little bit of in office, a little bit of work from home, or at least some flexibility in that. We've seen a lot of people work from home for the past couple of years. So transitioning back to full-time in office can definitely be a deterrent for some good quality candidates. So we definitely see, the talent pool decrease when you go to exclusively in office. People have really enjoyed the flexibility, at least in work from home. And then even just the office environment too, having some flexibility there. And then a convenient commute. So again, kind of playing into that hybrid role being ideal. A couple of days a week in office to build a nice community and have some good collaboration between teammates. But then also having some flexibility in not having to do the commute. Sometimes it's hard to find really good talent that is local, especially if you're in a little bit more rural, or for instance, you're hiring from, you're tapping into a talent pool in a different community. We see Ottawa has a big booming tech community. So maybe you're hiring from Ottawa to try and get a little bit lower salary, cost of living, and obviously you wouldn't want them to have to commute. And then job security. Obviously, full-time permanent is kind of the thought process of most people. That's the ideal. Definitely the workforce is changing. We're seeing a lot more gig-based, contract, part-time roles. I think that eventually we'll see people adapting to that lifestyle. But right now, I think I'm still getting a lot of feedback from candidates that doesn't feel super secure. People are looking for full-time permanent. So yeah, depending on what you're able to offer for that role, if you can make a full-time permanent hire work, then you'll probably get more talent, a higher supply of candidates for that role. Anything that you wanted to add, Joss?
Oh, no, that sounds great. I know we're kind of coming to time here. We've got one last slide. Darren, thanks for joining us. Best of luck to you. And and Janine, thanks for your comment there too. Sarah, I'm not sure if you saw that, but her and her company recently just started a private HSA internally, which made all employees very happy.
Yeah. That's
great to see that.
amazing.
Yeah. All right. Let's see here. On to our final slide.
Yeah, so just other things from a candidate's perspective. So I mentioned this earlier when we were talking about building out the job description. And this comes into play with your interview questions as well. One of the most important pieces in finding a good hire is finding a good value alignment. So being able to feel out some of those intrinsic motivation factors. So knowing what your company values are and making sure that those are accessible to the people who are hiring or who are applying to the role is really, really important. So things that you look for in terms of professional values would be, digging into the candidate's why. I like to hear, what got them into their role. Why did they choose that path? Was there a specific story, that made them really passionate about what they do? Finding someone who's passionate behind the goal of the company is equally as important as finding someone who's good at the job. So the whole company has an end goal, as well as the goal of the talent or the skill that you're looking to hire for. So finding somebody who has both, aligns with both, is going to be really important for making sure that you have a good hire who's got good professional values, timeliness, good communication, good work ethic, all of those important pieces for making sure that they're not being disruptive in the workplace, not a disruptive hire.
One of my personal favorite things about doing what we do is when we get that value alignment just right between a candidate and an employer, and there's just sparks. There's energy in the room, like you can tell, Sarah can tell right away. Sometimes we all go out for dinner after with the clients and the candidate, and it's just, it's really something special. It doesn't happen every time. Sometimes it's the right person, they got the right skill set, they come in, they put their head down, they do a good job. That's totally fine. But every once in a while, the match just works perfectly, and that's a high.
Question.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah and Justin. I love everything you had to say, and so many thoughts going through my mind about hiring now. One of the main questions was about the salary on the job posting. So I'm glad that you spoke to that a lot, because a lot of people were unsure about that one. I've got some more questions for you here. What about a business that requires specific training and is a demanding position? Are there any suggestions to attract staff?
Do you want to touch on that, Joss?
So it's a specific industry, requires specific training? Was that the question?
Yeah, very specific, and maybe some more demanding elements to the job.
I see. Yeah. Well, I think as you start to see more and more skills be required, typically it's a higher and higher level of role. We get more and more complicated wish lists, let's call it, right? And of course, the more specific and the more demanding, typically the smaller and smaller candidate pool. So that's something that that we kind of assess on a job-to-job basis for our team internally. We try to classify what would the difficulty rating, so to speak, be to be able to find an optimal match for something like that. So I wish there was a silver bullet for that. It sounds like this individual is in a position where it's going to be quite challenging to find the right folks. When you find yourself in that position, I would recommend keep an eye on how much time and energy you or your team is putting into trying to source that individual or individuals, right? There's a lot of great resources out there. There's a lot of folks that would be able to help. So I know it's kind of a cop-out answer, and I wish I had something stronger for you, but the reality of it is the higher we go and the more specific we get, the harder it is. Our services, for an example, we do really well in the white collar space. Our partnership with LinkedIn allows us to reach folks that if you've got a LinkedIn profile, we can reach them no problem. But for the more blue collar scenes, in all different levels of hiring, from boots on the ground to mid-level management, all the way up kind of pre-corporate, that's a weak spot, for example, for us. So I wish, we should look, Sarah, we should find some names of folks that could help on the sourcing side or even on the education side for maybe more blue collar industries, as an example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for sure being open to referrals too, like tapping into your own community, building a community and a network, like doing your own boots on the ground, going out to different events and things like that. That's a good way to find that type of skill too. Someone who has the education, I guess, like that's another thing. So just to, like, I wish there was more details to the question, because I feel like there's a few different ways that I could answer this. If it's like a highly technical role that requires a certain amount of education and like certifications and things like that, part of our LinkedIn tool allows for us to actually search for those, so that we can reduce our search to specifically people who are qualified for that or have those skills. And if you use like LinkedIn job postings, there's a section when you're filling out the job posting to ask like pre-screening questions, and you can make custom questions to include for those, so that you're at least not spending time talking to people who are clearly completely not qualified for the role. Mm-hmm. When it comes to things like, I'm thinking that, for example, nursing and things like that, yeah, that one, I think getting really in touch with schools, building out some sort of relationship with local schools that offer the education that's required. Also not being afraid to bring on like a co-op student or something like that from like fresh from school, and then helping kind of mentor them and bringing them along yourself. It can be helpful too.
Awesome. Thank you both. This one's a little specific as well. What is the best time, as in how many weeks or months before product launch, for a food startup to start the hiring process? So maybe you can speak to that generally as well.
Sure. Well, that is a great question. So I think the first thing that would go through my mind is, how long do I want to allow for that process to take place? So Sarah's got some great stats on this. We typically see an interview process take between the 2 to 4 week mark, especially for the smaller guys. It can move a little bit faster, like in this example. So I would give yourselves at least 1 month. Now that's 1 month from when you have candidates that you're excited about and you're talking to. Okay, so we've got 1 month to account for there. Now we've got the time that we're going to estimate and say, how long is it going to take us to find a short list, as we call it, typically anywhere between 6 to 12 fully qualified individuals. So now you're making decisions on who's the right fit as opposed to who's qualified, right? It should all be qualified. Now let's go down a level and say who's going to jive really well with who they're going to report to and their teammates working side by side, right? So that could be a couple of weeks, could be a couple of months, depends if you want to try to do that yourself or bring on some help, right? So let's ballpark 1 month for your interviewing at minimum, at kind of an X amount of time, 1 or 2 months, let's say, to find candidates, unless you wanted to get professional help. Now let's talk about your runway. So I want to launch a service, right? And I know that for me to accomplish that, my MVP is going to need a team of 6, all right? A couple developers, a couple boots on the ground, a couple sales guys, 1 or 2 leadership, and then admin support, HR, something like that. Kind of that traditional group of 6, right? It's really strong, good strengths, kind of cover each other's weaknesses. Well, what's a runway look like for something like that, right? If we've got our startup comp packages, typically quite modest, right? But even to hire a team of 6 for a year, even with modern or very modest compensation packages, you're still looking at a couple $100,000, right? All in. So 2 main considerations to try to keep things light for now. 1 would be the timeline that you'd like to ballpark to find the right folks. And then 2 would be, how long can you sustain those salaries and those compensation packages while you're pre-revenue, or it's just starting to trickle in and you're not covering op costs yet.
Great. I'll move to the question in the chat so you can read along with me if you like. Can you share any points on the probationary period performance reviews and the most effective method, formal, informal, and frequency?
Yeah, I love that. So I would do, so first off, I guess it depends on the length of probationary period. We see anything from 3 weeks, or sorry, 3 months to 6 months. I don't think I've seen anything longer than 6 months. I'm sure there are something out there, but it's not very common and it wouldn't be very appealing to candidates. A lot of benefits and things like that don't kick in until you're through your probationary period. So the 3 to 6 months is usually the more common time allotment for that. I would say, you're not wanting to be hovering too much, but I would say anything from, every 2-3 weeks, doing a quick sit down, even just getting feedback, like making sure that there's a really open dialogue, setting that precedent right off the bat, even through the interview process. Those expectations and the openness that they're welcome to come to you with anything. We start like in the early stages, especially if there may be a little more junior, and there's more supervision there to begin with. You may be having those conversations just naturally a little bit more frequently. But I would say in terms of, you don't want to be bothering your other employees too much. So checking in with them every couple of weeks, every 2 weeks to see how things are going, making sure that they're able to give some feedback to the performance of the new hire as well, so that you can paint yourself a full picture of, how they're getting along with everybody, the company culture fit, their productivity, all of those pieces. And then keeping it fairly informal. Not too informal, but making sure that it's a really comfortable conversation. It can be really intimidating to like call them into your office and have this very serious chat. So just letting it be a fairly open dialogue, hearing how they're enjoying the work, if there's any pain points for them, being able to kind of coach them through that and make sure that they know that they're supported will give them the best chance to be successful there as well.
Great question, though.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. Oh, Mickey's got a good point here. Sure thing. Do you see that, Sarah?
Yeah, just reading it right now. Can you explain to people who may not understand what that is? Oh, yeah, of course. Do you want to? You can touch on this stuff.
Oh, sure. Okay. So this will be baked into your employment contract, right? So when it's time to hire, unfortunately, this is something you should have your lawyer look over. It shouldn't be too expensive to build a contract. I'm sure some of you have them out there. Some of you may not. That's totally okay. There's lots of great templates you can use to start. And then I would highly recommend having a lawyer just at least look over it once or twice before you're actually issuing them to new hires. But what a probationary period allows you to do is have a moment, let's say it's 3 to 6 months, which is normally what Sarah and I see, where if it doesn't work out for a multitude of reasons, essentially a termination can take place without the typical ramifications. There's a wide range of ramifications in there, and this agreement allows you to be protected on both parties, where they can leave of their own accord for a number of reasons and you can terminate them for a number of reasons, right? And the purpose is to be, it's not to incentivize failure or anything like that. It's to kind of hedge your bets, right? Like Sarah said before, we really don't know if it's going to work until we try, till we roll our sleeves up and we've got butts and seats, so to speak. So this is a great way for especially earlier stage companies, but quite frankly, we recommend it all the way up to the top. If your roles that you're looking to hire will allow for that period of letting the sparks kind of fly before you guys fully lock up, then power to you. Was there a second part here too? Quit the relationship with no notice? No, okay, so that's a common misconception. Notice is still, it's not something that should be breezed over. It's your contract. You can really write whatever you want. There's a few constraints that each government has at the provincial level and the federal level. So there's a couple of things, regardless of your contract, that if you did go to court for a poor termination, you could still be held liable regardless of what you put in your contract. But if you're playing by the rules and you're not trying to screw anybody over, really, there's a lot of room for hedging of bets, let's say. But notice should be something that's always given and considered in every situation. And that goes both ways too. Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of like risks and benefits existing during this time, of course, they may give no notice to you. I definitely, when I'm talking to my candidates, the expectation is as much notice as possible, just so that you're prepared, and you can get another job posting up. You can start looking while there's still a butt in the seat. But there is the possibility that they may leave with no notice. We have seen that happen with candidates in the past. So that is a bit of a risk through that period, that they may decide it's not a good fit and leave without notice. That's not as common if, again, we go back to that whole dialogue piece, having a really open communication line with your new hires, and making sure you're getting lots of feedback. It's a two-way street. Like, you're giving them feedback, you're giving them expectations, and you're also listening to what they have to say too. And you can kind of pick up on some discomfort, some body language, all of those kinds of things to figure out, if they're feeling comfortable to continue to work with you. And some of the like downsides to it, usually like benefits and things like that, don't kick into place until after the probationary period. So on the candidate side, of course, going through a long probationary period feels like a decrease in that job security, as well as a delay in all of those benefits. But yeah, definitely want to make sure you give a good runway to feel out that employee's potential and skill before you get kind of sticky with the legal stuff.
And we know it's challenging, like 3 months of paying a comp package, 6 months of comp, like that's not nothing. We're fully aware of that. I'm sure you guys are too. It's tough, right? So we put in every little piece we can just to help hedge those bets, to ease that burden. But at the end of the day, it's like we said, it's not a silver bullet. While we're on the topic, I'd like to add one thing. For any of you folks that are looking to bring on somebody at a co-founder level or director level over the next like kind of 6 to 12 months, I would highly recommend looking into how shares vest. That's an interesting one that really ties into what Sarah just said there. If you're looking to chip off some equity to a recent hire or a new hire, look at a vesting plan. Now, I'm not sure how much people know about this. I don't want to blab about it too much here, but essentially you can take similar ideology to our probation period with benefits with shares in your company. So essentially, these plans typically range from 2 to 5 years, and over the portion of working together and meeting performance requirements, shares that are issued to that individual from your organization will vest and essentially become valid, right? So I'd be happy to talk to folks more about that down the road. You can email me and Sarah, of course, at any time, but something to really consider, because comp is tough, especially when you're small. We understand that 100%. We go through that ourselves, right? So using being creative with shares and equity plans can really give yourself an edge to lock in that really high caliber talent that we're all hoping to gain. So.
Thank you, Justin. Is there a way for us to access your talent insights that you pull from LinkedIn? Is that a service we can access ourselves?
It's not something that you'd be able to access yourselves. It's a login from our team. But I think we'd be happy to go through kind of like an example and show folks. Sarah, I don't think it'd be wise for us to do that today under a recording. I need to check our terms and service with LinkedIn. It's not a cheap service, and it's not unfortunately ours to give, right? We lease it essentially. So I think to keep things fair, we should probably postpone that until I hear back from them on that. I'll be sure to ask them. We'd be happy to jump through an example with anybody if you reach out. And just to give an example of what it does, Sarah, do you want to just do a quick 2 minutes on what kind of information they could gain from that?
Yeah, so I touched on it briefly earlier. This is the tool where you can take like job title, some different skills, and even some right down to like your old Boolean search keywords, location, and it gives you an assessment of that talent pool. So it'll give you some pieces of data the amount of like the trending high, is it a trending hire? Is it a high demand role, which may mean that there's not a lot of supply. So a lot of demand, not a lot of supply, might be harder to hire. It'll give you a breakdown of the typical salary range for that role. And if you keep the location general, like, all of Canada or all of Ontario, it'll actually tell you exactly like where the majority of those candidates are coming from. So that gives you just a really good picture in building out a strategy for hiring that type of talent. Right down to sharing some of the profiles of candidates that have come up in that search that you can see right from that. So we usually use that right off the bat, like when we are working. So when we sign on with a company, and we're going through that very first early stage where we're consulting, trying to figure out what their pain points are. We start with the skills, because it may not be the job title that they're thinking that it is. So what are the skills that you need to achieve that role or that task that you feel is kind of missing? So we'll go through that and we'll do an assessment, see what kind of job titles are out there. What do these skills typically fall into as a job title? Because job titles it is our way of communicating with people to find that talent, but sometimes job titles don't really match what your skill set is. So that's usually where we start. We start with the skills and any other kind of requirements, education, those pieces, and then we look at what we've got, where those people are coming from, and what their job titles are, and then that's how we kind of build out our job description.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And another question that I had too was, we have a lot of clients who have kind of seasonal periods where they need to hire. And I know you talked about the job security being very important and that kind of stuff. So I just wondered if you had any advice on seasonal hiring.
First of all, that's very common. And we've noticed that through all different ranges, whether it's industry or company size. It's a strategy that some of our Fortune 500 clients use exclusively. They like to do big rounds of hirings typically to build out a team. I'm not sure if you guys have seen any of the articles, but over the last few years, there's been some amazing big initiatives coming to Kitchener, KW, Toronto, a little bit in Guelph as well, where these larger entities are setting up a satellite shop, which is like 200 people. Sometimes they're massive, and it's a sprint. So typically they'll kind of transfer over a couple of key members, and then their job will be, okay, build out the rest of the team, and you've got this long to do it. We want to have a team of X size, operating in Y department, let's say by this time, by a year from now, for example. So what we've noticed is doing those hiring blitzes and then pausing and letting the dust settle, right? Even if you think you've hired the right people and you did a big blitz, let's say, even a smaller business hiring 3 or 4 folks, if you're only 10 or 20 strong, that's a huge percentage of your total company, right? So taking time to see how they all work together can be really, really important. And we see that, like I said, being almost exclusive, Sarah? Like it's pretty much a quarter or 2 on big hiring rounds and then a quarter or 2 off to let it settle. And there'll be the odd one in between, or if there's a little bit of turnover and somebody moves on, right? If we're just filling one at a time, we see it a little bit more consistently, but the bigger pushes, it's typically on off. Do you have any advice though for that, Sarah? I wouldn't.
Yeah, so I guess it depends. I think that the hiring cycles, when you're hiring full time, you do see that seasonal blitz in hiring. But in terms of needing that amount of volume of hands-on, so my advice for that would be back to the early strategy of what roles need to be full-time and what ones can be contract. Because I think it's hard if you are more contract than full-time. It's a lot of turnover. It's a lot of change. It's hard to keep up with that quality and that collaboration and team environment. But if you have a couple of core members that you could utilize all year round, and then building out, some different pipelines for getting some people in for like the higher volume demand times for your company. Because we specialize in hiring full-time, but we see a lot of companies utilize contract. There are a lot of people in this day and age who are graduating and looking for contract. So there is a good pipeline of contract employees. So yeah, and there's lots of good sites for finding contract employees. You've got your like Upwork and some of your different freelance websites and things like that allows for you to find those people. And even in your LinkedIn searches, you can actually specify that you're looking for contract candidates. So if they've specified in their LinkedIn profile that they are looking for contract, they'll come up in your search. So I definitely wouldn't shy away from contract just to help you get through those like high demand, busy times. But I think what's important is having a really central collaborative team to help you with that turnover.
And the onboarding and training associated with it too.
Yeah.
Having that foundational team, like Sarah said, means you have more of a capacity to onboard more contracted individuals where they can hit the ground running, so to speak, right? As opposed to not having that team to help show exactly what they need them to do to be successful, or we see it all land on the head and shoulders of whoever's in charge of the business. And now you've got a large amount of additional work that's outside of your traditional duties, just trying to get your contractors up and running and efficient. So.
Great. I have two more quick questions and then I'll turn it back to Mickey. How can you ensure hires are comfortable with the necessary technology or to learn technology requirements for the program beyond simply listing the requirements like in the job description? Would you suggest an interview test to confirm this?
Yeah, definitely. And there's some really cool, so whether you have like the in-depth LinkedIn tool that we have through our partnership with LinkedIn, or you're just using like LinkedIn Premium, kind of the basic amount, don't be afraid to check out LinkedIn profiles. Most professionals at this point have LinkedIn, and that can be an excellent tool for employers when they're hiring, particularly the skills and assessments section. Look for like verification from other people. So, you can go in and endorse skills. So looking at that section, there's also a section to show like LinkedIn certificates that it's quite easy for people to do. They can go in and do like basically a test. So LinkedIn will take them through this little course and then they'll get a certification basically saying this person, has successfully completed X skill. Salesforce, whatever, like some sort of CRM, some sort of software tool. So that's a good way to know that they have, the basic skills. That's, kind of your lower level budget fix for that. When you start to have a bit of a bigger hiring budget, you can move to some different software tools that allow for you to test those things. I'm thinking particularly when it comes to software. So like software engineering roles, we see people use Codility. That's a web-based software that allows for real-time coding problems. So that gives you a good idea of their capabilities right away.
One solution, oh, sorry, Sarah, just wanted to add to that. One solution too, I always admired, it's quite creative. We see this more with some of our mid-sized clients. Even the folks that have nothing to do with the interview process, but they're tremendously talented with certain softwares or they're in a highly technical position, sometimes we'll see the HR team or the leadership team do 80 to 90% of the interview process, the onboarding, the vetting, and the assessment. But then they'll have one of their more technical individuals spend maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes just going through some of those exact skills, let's say, that are critical to your organization's success. We absolutely understand if you see somebody post on a resume, hey, I'm great at this, and you have an interview, but you're not an expert yourself. So you could ask a few educated questions, a few Google searches, of course. But I've always admired that solution where you include one other member of your team who is an expert, right? To sit in and observe, right? And even if they're not comfortable asking questions or interviewing them per se, just having their eyes throughout that interview process, or giving you advice on some pointed questions to help you build confidence in their actual ability with that skill set, whatever it might be, or qualification, or specific software suite. All of that's fair game. Like I said, some of our local clients do that today, and it's absolutely helped them spot a few folks that are maybe a little more confident than they are experienced with certain skill sets. So.
I think
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, maybe we'll start now.
No, that's okay. That's really great. Thank you. I was just going to say that's a good tip too. I always like bringing in somebody else from the team, even if they're not experts. Sometimes it's good just to have someone who'll be working with, rather than reporting. Have kind of as a direct report kind of relationship. It's always nice to get some more opinions. I like that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Justin and Sarah. We're out of time for today, which is fantastic. Lots of good conversations and questions. Everybody on the call, thank you for joining. If you have questions or would like to reach out to Justin and Sarah, just let Shauna and I know, and we will get you in touch, and certainly walk you through an introduction. Shauna has hopefully posted or will be posting a link to the feedback form. Please fill it out and let us know how today's session went. But of course, tell us what you would like to see at a next Toolkit Tuesday. Thank you again to our wonderful interpreters from SLEO, all of our sponsors, and thank you to all of you for joining. I really wish you a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much, Shauna, and we will see you all next month. Thanks, and take care.
Thanks, everyone.